The Prophet of the Frontier, Joseph Smith's visionary journey, controversial legacy, and the birth of Mormonism in early America. Introduction and historical context. America in the early 19th century was a land of restless energy, ever-shifting frontiers, and fervent religious experimentation. Amid the rolling hills of New England, the bustling shipping ports, and the fertile farmland spreading westward, the country's population was swelling. The War of 1812 was barely behind them, and pioneers steadily pressed into territories that would become the states of the Midwest. Religious revivals, commonly known as the Second Great Awakening, electrified the countryside with tent meetings and roaming preachers. People yearned for direct spiritual experiences, personal revelations, and answers to theological questions that more traditional denominations sometimes left unaddressed. In this roiling spiritual environment arose Joseph Smith Jr., a man who claimed visions of angels, the discovery of golden plates that told the story of a lost civilization, and the restoration of what he called Christ's true church. From the beginning, his life and claims were met with equal parts belief and skepticism, adoration and scorn. Over time, his movement, later known as the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, shaped itself into a new religious tradition, with doctrines that included modern prophecy, additional scripture beyond the Bible, and eventually the controversial practice of plural marriage, polygamy. This biographical narrative seeks to unfold not only the life of Joseph Smith, but also the social, cultural, and historical forces that set the stage for a farm boy from the frontiers of New England and western New York to become one of the most influential and controversial religious figures in American history. Chapter 1. An American Frontier Childhood, 1805-1816. Joseph Smith Jr. was born on December 23, 1805, in the small town of Sharon, Vermont. The story of his birth into the Smith family is typical of many frontier families in early 19th century America. Economically humble, deeply religious, and always one harvest or misfortune away from poverty. His father, Joseph Smith Sr., and mother, Lucy Mack Smith, both possessed a certain restlessness of spirit and mind, characteristic of settlers always on the lookout for better land or an auspicious opportunity. Hard beginnings in Vermont. Vermont in the early 1800s was a harsh environment for many farming families. The Smiths faced repeated crop failures, debt, and the general precariousness of a rapidly expanding nation. Winters were long and cold, summers often too short to guarantee abundant harvests. Nonetheless, Joseph's parents did their best to instill in him values of industriousness, devotion to family, and faith in divine providence. The Smiths were religious in a typical Protestant sense, though they were not strictly bound to any single denomination. Lucy Mack Smith, in particular, was a strong-minded woman, deeply concerned with religious questions. When Joseph was a small child, an epidemic of typhoid fever swept through the region, creating health challenges that would affect him for the rest of his life. Joseph contracted the disease, and complications led to a serious infection in his leg. In a time when modern medicine was still nascent, the procedure performed on his leg without modern anesthesia was excruciating. This event shaped him. It ingrained both a sense of personal endurance and a capacity for surviving tremendous pain. Migrant instability. Despite Lucy and Joseph Sr.'s best efforts, financial pressures compelled them to pack their belongings and move several times. By the time Joseph Jr. was around 10 years old, the Smith family pulled up stakes from Vermont to chase better opportunities, first to New Hampshire, then further westward. Their migratory life was emblematic of early America. They were believers in the promise that prosperity could be found just over the next hill or in the next town, as new territories opened for settlement. As the Smiths traveled, young Joseph gleaned stories of the American Revolution from older relatives who had either lived through it or heard fresh tales of its struggles. Meanwhile, he absorbed the religious revivalism in the air. Circuit-riding ministers, camp meetings, and fervent sermons proclaiming imminent divine judgment were commonplace. People believed wholeheartedly in direct revelations from God, in miracles, and in the possibility that new truths might still be revealed. Early influences. Young Joseph's worldview was formed against this backdrop of faith and hardship. Stories circulated in his household about unusual dreams and spiritual experiences. Joseph Sr. was known to have visionary dreams, and Lucy also recounted spiritual visitations. These stories, recounted around the family hearth, lent credence to the possibility of modern revelations, an idea that would be central to Joseph Jr.'s later claims. Despite sparse formal education, Joseph showed interest in religious questions from an early age. This was not uncommon. The Bible was often one of the few books a family possessed. Yet Joseph's curiosity went beyond pious reading. He was, in many respects, a product of the burned-over district, a term later used for Western New York, where repeated waves of revivalism left behind countless converts, but also intense debates about doctrine, visions, and the nature of personal salvation, a spirit of independence. As a child, Joseph worked on family farms, helping with the sowing of seeds, harvesting of crops, and care of animals. Necessity forced him into physical labor that was often exhausting, but it also gave him the opportunity to explore the woods, hills, and fields that would become integral to his sense of solitude and communion with nature. In these quiet spaces, he later recalled, he often prayed in secret, attempting to understand the religious fervor swirling through churches and revivals around him. This sense of both familial devotion and personal searching characterized Joseph's early childhood. Although it was marked by poverty, moves, and occasional desperation, the environment laid the groundwork for a boy who believed in divine messages and direct communication with God. To fully understand Joseph Smith, one must consider the daily hardships, the fervent religious energies, and the frontier environment that tested a family's faith at every turn. Chapter 2. Seeking Fortune and Faith, 1816-1820. Moved to Palmyra, New York. By 1816, the Smith family had relocated to Palmyra, New York, an area near the Erie Canal's projected path. New York was rapidly developing, with farmland valued for its rich soil and the promise of commerce once the canal was completed. The Smiths, like many others, hoped to ride the wave of growth. Palmyra was a crossroads of ideas. Traveling salesmen, religious revivalists, and settlers from various backgrounds passed through. Newspapers promoted scientific discoveries, political debates, and religious commentary. Book peddlers hawked pamphlets about everything from herbal medicine to historical curiosities like ancient Native American mounds, fueling popular speculation about the origins of the continent's earlier inhabitants. In this environment, Joseph's curiosity deepened. Now a teenager, he worked odd jobs to help the family. While the Smith family's finances remained precarious, the sense of possibility in this bustling region left its mark on Joseph. Like other families, the Smiths engaged in some money-digging and treasure-seeking, a not uncommon pastime among certain rural folk who believed that buried Spanish gold or lost pirate treasure might lie beneath the hills and forests of upstate New York. The culture of treasure hunting. In the early 19th century, treasure digging was an odd mixture of folklore, superstition, and emerging capitalist dreams. Stories about lost mines or hidden caches of gold peppered local lore. Individuals used divining rods or seer stones, objects believed to help locate hidden valuables. Joseph Smith would later admit to having participated in treasure digging, using a seer stone to look for lost items or supposed treasures. Critics would point to this as evidence of deception, while supporters might claim it was a genuine spiritual gift that foreshadowed his prophetic calling. Young Joseph's involvement in these activities foreshadowed the intense scrutiny he would face later in life. His knack for seeing beyond the mundane was increasingly evident, yet it also brought him into conflict with others who found such practices fraudulent or superstitious. The Smiths' money-digging escapades sometimes ended in disappointment or disputes over payment. Still, Joseph persisted. For him, the blurred lines between tangible reality and spiritual possibility remained open territory. The stir of revival meetings. Around the same time, waves of religious revivals swept through Palmyra and surrounding areas. Known for its fervent camp meetings, the region became a hotbed for preaching about salvation, redemption, and the fires of damnation. Ministers from Methodist, Baptist, Presbyterian, and other denominations held large outdoor gatherings that lasted for days. Families attended to hear fiery sermons, witness supposed miracles, and hopefully receive spiritual conversion. Joseph, who often joined neighbors and family at these gatherings, observed closely. He saw people fall to their knees in prayer, speak in ecstatic utterances, and recount personal revelations. The boundaries between earthly life and heavenly experiences seemed fluid indeed. Yet the revivals also generated bitter rivalries between denominations. Ministers not only pleaded for souls but also for loyalty to their specific creeds. Doctrine clashed with doctrine, and competing churches often argued vehemently over theology. Joseph later recalled feeling confounded by this sectarian strife. Deeply believing in God and the Bible, he wondered why so many Christian denominations, each professing to be right, remained at odds on fundamental doctrinal points, signs of a searching soul. By the time Joseph was 14, he had begun to question his own salvation and the authenticity of the churches around him. He expressed curiosity about which church, if any, held the truth. While his formal education was meager, his exposure to diverse religious ideas in this burned-over district laid a rich groundwork for existential and theological inquiry. He later claimed that, during this period, a particularly impactful passage of Scripture drove him to seek divine guidance. Reading James 1:5, "If any of you lack wisdom, let him ask of God." Joseph felt compelled to ask God directly which church was right. Those around him remembered him as a quiet yet intense young man, prone to reflection. Beneath his unassuming demeanor lay a fierce sense of spiritual curiosity. Palmyra was an arena for competing religious voices, and Joseph listened to them all. He yearned for a definitive answer, a surety that eluded the revival preachers who contradicted each other at every turn. Family tensions and hopes. During this period, Joseph's father, Joseph Sr., faced continuing financial troubles. The Smith family's farm sometimes failed to yield enough to cover debts. The older children, including Joseph's older brother Alvin, worked long hours to sustain the household. Alvin, who died unexpectedly in 1823, played a significant role in Joseph's life, offering unwavering support and encouragement. Alvin's death would weigh heavily on the entire Smith family and on Joseph's religious development. Lucy Mack Smith, ever the devoted mother, encouraged her children to have faith and to seek truth from God. Her convictions and storytelling shaped the atmosphere of the home. By many accounts, she strongly believed her family was destined for a higher purpose, a perspective that might have emboldened Joseph's sense of spiritual identity. Questions and preparations. In hindsight, we see Joseph at 15 or 16 years old, standing on the threshold of the extraordinary claims he would soon make. His worldview was not formed in a vacuum. He lived at a time and place where religious enthusiasm and visionary beliefs were not mere anomalies, but part of the cultural fabric. To some, this environment merely explains how Joseph might have constructed his alleged divine experiences out of popular superstition. To others, it underscores that Joseph was chosen by Providence at a time ripe for new revelations. In either case, the synergy of frontier opportunity, religious fervor, and personal searching prepared Joseph for a pivotal moment, what he would later call the first vision. That vision would set into motion a chain of events that changed American religious history and reverberates to this day. Chapter 3. The First Vision and Early Revelations, 1820-1823. A Boy in the Grove. According to Joseph's later accounts, published years after the fact, he felt an overwhelming desire to pray for wisdom in the spring of 1820. He was 14 years old. One morning he walked into a secluded grove of trees near his family's farm in Palmyra. Kneeling amidst the quiet rustle of leaves, he attempted to speak aloud a prayer for the first time in his life. Joseph recounted a dramatic spiritual assault, a feeling of impending doom that seized him, as though an unseen evil tried to prevent his prayer. Summoning all his courage, he called upon God for deliverance. At that moment, Joseph described a pillar of light descending upon him. He claimed to see two radiant personages, one of whom addressed him by name, pointed to the other, and said, "This is my beloved son, hear him." In this vision, as Joseph later narrated, he asked which of the churches was correct, only to be told that none was wholly right and that he should join none of them. This revelation, now famously referred to by Latter-day Saints as the First Vision, forms the foundational event of the Restoration movement. Critics, however, point out that Joseph did not publish a written account of this vision until 1832, and that the details evolved over time in subsequent tellings. They question whether the first vision story emerged gradually, influenced by later theological developments, a world caught unaware. After the supposed vision, Joseph said he told a local preacher about the experience and was met with ridicule and contempt. This reaction likely discouraged him from speaking broadly about it at first. Indeed, no major religious revival or immediate social shift followed in the direct wake of 1820. Joseph was still just a farm boy with no public platform. Life continued in Palmyra, with the cycles of planting and harvest, local gossip, and occasional revivals. Yet the seed of his extraordinary claim had been planted, a seed that would, in time, grow into a movement. Visitations from Moroni. Joseph described another remarkable event occurring 3 years later, on the night of September 21st, 1823. While praying in his bedroom, he claimed a heavenly messenger appeared, a resurrected being named Moroni. Clothed in brilliant white and hovering in the air, Moroni told him about a book written upon golden plates, buried in a nearby hill, later called Cumorah by believers. This record, Moroni said, contained the religious history of ancient inhabitants of the Americas and the fullness of the everlasting gospel as delivered by Jesus Christ to these people. Moreover, Moroni informed Joseph that the plates were deposited for a specific purpose, to bring forth new scripture and restore divine truths lost after the original apostles' times. This was not the entirety of Moroni's message. He also warned Joseph that he must keep the plates safe and not show them to unauthorized individuals under penalty of God's displeasure. Over the course of that night, Moroni reportedly appeared to Joseph multiple times, repeating the same instructions and prophecies. Alvin's death and family grief. This same period brought great sorrow to the Smith family. Alvin, Joseph's beloved older brother, died unexpectedly in November 1823 due to complications from surgery. On his deathbed, Alvin reportedly charged Joseph to do all in his power to secure the ancient record. Some years later, Joseph recounted that Alvin's passing impacted him profoundly. It steeled his resolve to see through whatever divine mission he believed he had received. Local rumors and gossip grew, even if the specifics of Joseph's supernatural claims were not fully known. Some neighbors noticed that Joseph seemed preoccupied with religious and mystical ideas. Others dismissed him as a simple farm boy with wild stories. But the Smiths, grieving for Alvin, rallied around Joseph, even as he continued to claim heavenly visitations. Return to the hill. Soon after Moroni's initial appearance, Joseph said he was guided to a prominent hill about 3 miles from his home, later referred to by early saints as Cumorah. There, hidden under a stone in a box of stone or cement, he discovered the golden plates. However, when he attempted to remove them, he felt a shock and was prevented from doing so. Moroni appeared again, instructing him that he was not yet ready. He needed to mature spiritually and learn humility. Joseph later remarked that his youthful excitement about personal gain might have clouded his judgment. Indeed, in a culture where treasure-seeking was not uncommon, he might initially have viewed the golden plates as a literal treasure. Moroni commanded Joseph to return to the hill annually on the same date, each time receiving instruction and guidance. The message was clear. Joseph had a divine mission, but he must undergo further preparation. Only after 4 years of waiting and repeated visits to the hill would he be permitted to take the plates into his custody. Controversy and skepticism. Word began to circulate that Joseph claimed knowledge of a hidden record of ancient origin. Skeptics saw in Joseph's story an extension of his earlier treasure-digging activities. If he had indeed found something, they surmised, he was either a fraud out to make a profit, or an impressionable young man deluded by superstition. The broader public generally had no inkling this young man's claims would spawn a new religious denomination, yet Joseph's family remained supportive. Lucy Mack Smith in particular saw divine purpose behind Joseph's experiences. She often defended him from neighbors' mockery. That Joseph himself insisted on the authenticity of his visions cannot be denied. Many who knew him personally described a plain-spoken sincerity. Others were less convinced, noting that Joseph had been involved in money digging, which undermined his credibility for some. The calm before the storm. In these early years, Joseph Smith still walked the line between boyhood and adulthood. He performed ordinary chores, occasionally worked for neighbors, and engaged in local activities. Yet he carried within him an extraordinary secret, or so he claimed. By 1823, he was a figure perched on the edge of destiny, filled with expectation, subject to awe or derision depending on one's point of view. From a historical vantage point, it is essential to note that few written records from the immediate period confirm the specifics of Joseph's visions. Much of what we know comes from Joseph's later narratives or from the recollections of family and friends. The scarcity of early documentation has fueled debate, especially among historians who attempt to separate myth from fact. Still, for believers, these years stand as a testament to Joseph's divine tutoring under an angelic instructor. For critics, they offer evidence that Joseph's story grew and morphed, perhaps influenced by local folklore, personal imagination, and a desire for religious significance. However one views it, the stage was set. Joseph's next steps would thrust him into the public eye in ways that neither he nor his neighbors could have foreseen. Chapter 4. The Golden Plates and the Book of Mormon, 1823-1830. 4 years of preparation. Between 1823 and 1827, Joseph annually visited the hill where the plates were concealed. Each time, according to his later recollections, Moroni met him and taught him lessons about humility, faith, and the divine purpose behind the sacred record. At some point, Joseph claimed Moroni showed him various other relics, the Urim and Thummim, interpreting instruments prepared by God, and a breastplate said to be worn by ancient prophets. These 4 years were not without worldly complications. Joseph took on jobs to help support the family. He also continued to face ridicule from those who doubted his visionary claims. Yet slowly, a few acquaintances believed in his divine calling. His mother Lucy recounts that he regularly shared the angel's words with them in a quiet, family-centered setting. For Joseph, these years marked an inward struggle to remain true to what he believed was a divine command while living under constant suspicion from outsiders. He needed to develop the spiritual maturity that Moroni insisted upon before he could obtain the plates. Marriage to Emma Hale. In January 1827, Joseph traveled to Pennsylvania on business. There he met and soon married Emma Hale, daughter of Isaac Hale. Emma, by most accounts, was a thoughtful, devout woman who initially wasn't certain about Joseph's claims but believed in his sincerity. Her father, however, was openly skeptical. He found Joseph's treasure-digging reputation problematic and viewed the talk of a golden Bible as suspect. Despite Isaac Hale's disapproval, Emma and Joseph married on January 18, 1827. Emma's role in Joseph's life became crucial. She served as an early scribe and confidant in his translation work and remained a steadfast partner, though her own faith journey was marked by periods of doubt, particularly regarding plural marriage much later. But at this juncture, she represented a stabilizing presence, someone who believed in Joseph's integrity enough to support him in his purported divine mission, retrieving the plates. On September 22, 1827, Joseph asserted that Moroni finally entrusted him with the golden plates. He and Emma reportedly drove a wagon to the hill in the early hours of morning. Joseph removed the plates from their hiding place, along with the Urim and Thummim. Once in his possession, Joseph claimed the plates were under divine protection, but still he took great care to hide them. His success in obtaining the plates quickly ignited rumors. Some local residents believed Joseph might have discovered actual gold and formed plans to steal it. Joseph felt threatened enough that he decided to leave Palmyra and move to Harmony, Pennsylvania, near Emma's family. But there he faced skepticism and hostility from Isaac Hale, who demanded to see the plates. Joseph refused, stating that Moroni had forbidden anyone but designated individuals from viewing them. The refusal only deepened Isaac Hale's mistrust. Translation begins. In December 1827, using the Urim and Thummim, or alternatively, a seer stone placed in a hat to block out external light, Joseph began dictating what he believed was a translation of the golden plates. Emma served as one of his first scribes. The process was extraordinary. Joseph, with minimal formal education, dictated lengthy, complex passages of text without referring to notes, at least according to supporters who later described the process. Skeptics argue that Joseph could have composed the text from his own imagination or borrowed from local stories and biblical knowledge. They point to the language style of the resulting scripture, the Book of Mormon, as a product reflecting early 19th century religious themes and rhetorical patterns. Believers counter that the method of translation defies ordinary explanation, attributing it to divine inspiration. The lost 116 pages. In 1828, Martin Harris, a prosperous farmer from Palmyra who believed in Joseph's claims, visited Joseph in Harmony. Curious and anxious to reassure his own wife and friends, Harris repeatedly asked Joseph for permission to take some of the translated manuscript pages to show his skeptical associates. After initial refusals, Joseph appealed to God, through prayer, for permission. At last, Joseph reluctantly gave Harris 116 pages of the manuscript. Almost immediately, disaster struck. Those pages were lost, presumably stolen. Joseph believed they had fallen into the hands of enemies determined to publish altered versions to discredit him. Devastated, Joseph lamented this breach of trust. He claimed to have been temporarily stripped of the gift to translate for his disobedience. This event deeply shook him. For a time, Harris felt overwhelmed with guilt and sorrow. A fresh start with Oliver Cowdery. By early 1829, Joseph resumed the translation with a new scribe, Oliver Cowdery, a schoolteacher who had heard of Joseph's claims while boarding near the Smith family in New York. Oliver was intellectually curious and devout. His arrival at Harmony renewed momentum for the translation. In a matter of months, working long hours each day, Joseph and Oliver dictated and wrote what would become the bulk of the Book of Mormon. Their teamwork was seamless, according to both men's later testimonies. Oliver reported that the words flowed from Joseph's mouth with remarkable fluency. Joseph Smith himself said the translation was carried out by the gift and power of God. Reported visions and priesthood restoration. During the translation process, Joseph and Oliver came across passages referring to baptism and the authority to minister ordinances. They prayed about the matter on May 15, 1829. According to their accounts, John the Baptist appeared in glory, conferred the Aaronic priesthood upon them, and instructed them to baptize each other. This event is known among Latter-day Saints as the restoration of the Aaronic priesthood. Later they reported that the apostles Peter, James, and John conferred the Melchizedek priesthood, granting them apostolic authority. Skeptics note that these accounts of heavenly visitations were not widely circulated until years later, fueling debate about the event's timing and authenticity. Nevertheless, the concept of restored priesthood authority became central to Joseph's claim that he held the legitimate power to organize and lead Christ's church. Publication of the Book of Mormon. By early 1830, the translation was complete. Martin Harris mortgaged his farm to pay for printing costs. A printer in Palmyra, named Egbert Grandin, agreed to publish 5,000 copies. Despite hostility from portions of the local community, the Book of Mormon appeared in print in March 1830. Its title page declared it to be a record of God's dealings with the ancient inhabitants of the Americas and the most correct of any book on earth. Content and controversy. The Book of Mormon's narrative spans centuries, detailing migrations of people from the ancient Near East to the Americas under divine guidance. It chronicles the rise and fall of civilizations, the ministry of prophets, and culminates in a post-resurrection visitation by Jesus Christ. Believers hailed it as evidence of modern revelation and a companion scripture to the Bible. Critics derided it as a fabrication, pointing to perceived anachronisms such as references to horses, steel, and other elements in a presumed pre-Columbian American setting. Regardless, the publication stirred both excitement and denunciation. Some devoured its pages and felt a stirring in their hearts. Others read only to scoff. Joseph Smith's name was now firmly etched in the public arena, and people from neighboring towns came to see the so-called boy prophet. Some joined in belief, while others argued that it was a hoax. Converging believers. A small band of early believers coalesced around Joseph in the months following the Book of Mormon's release. Oliver Cowdery, Martin Harris, David Whitmer, and others bore testimony that they had either seen the golden plates or held them under divinely sanctioned circumstances. Their collective witness formed the foundation of what was soon to be organized as a new church. In the midst of this transformation, Joseph's personal life was far from comfortable. He and Emma faced debts, social ostracism, and frequent uprooting. Still, they pressed forward. Joseph, now in his mid-20s, was at the epicenter of a religious storm. His teachings, heralded as revelations by some, and dismissed as blasphemy by others. Chapter 5. Early Church Organization and Growing Pains, 1830–1831. Founding the Church. On April 6, 1830, in Fayette, New York, Joseph Smith formally organized the Church of Christ, later to be known as the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. By law, only 6 men were required to establish a religious society, though more people attended. Joseph was recognized as the presiding authority, a prophet, seer, and revelator. That day, believers practiced the sacrament, heard sermons, and experienced what they called the gifts of the Spirit. Yet the church was tiny, numbering only a few dozen people. Most were friends or family of Joseph, Oliver, Martin Harris, David and John Whitmer, and others who had participated in the translation. No grand cathedrals announced the advent of a new denomination. Instead, worship took place in homes, barns, or clearing in the woods. The faithful believed they were witnessing the restoration of the Church of Jesus Christ with the same authority as the early apostles. Opposition in New York. Opposition quickly mounted in surrounding areas. Local ministers accused Joseph of blasphemy and heresy, while some laid charges of fraud. People circulated stories of Joseph's treasure-digging past, and the press ridiculed the Book of Mormon as the Gold Bible. Joseph was arrested more than once on charges of being a disorderly person, though these cases generally ended in acquittal or dismissal. During these trying times, Joseph continued to receive and dictate revelations, which believers recorded and circulated among themselves. These revelations addressed matters of church governance, spiritual gifts, and moral commandments. Collectively, they shaped a distinct identity for the fledgling movement. The faithful believed they were receiving guidance directly from heaven through Joseph's revelations. Missionary efforts. Almost immediately, Joseph and other leaders began sending out missionaries, particularly to the western frontier. Oliver Cowdery led a small group of elders westward, aiming to preach to Native American tribes. They believed the Book of Mormon recounted the history of ancient American peoples and felt a divine mandate to share this new scripture with modern descendants of those civilizations. Although these attempts saw limited immediate success among Native Americans, the missionaries converted several individuals along the way, including Sidney Rigdon in Ohio, an influential preacher with a sizable following. Gathering to Ohio. In 1831, a revelation directed church members to gather in Kirtland, Ohio, a place about 20 miles east of Cleveland. The revelation declared that Kirtland would be a temporary base, while Missouri would eventually become the main center, or Zion. The exact reasons for relocating were both practical and spiritual. Opposition in New York was fierce, and in Kirtland, missionaries had found unexpected success. Sidney Rigdon, previously a Campbellite preacher, brought his congregation en masse into the new church, dramatically boosting membership. Hence, Joseph Smith led a migration of believers from New York to Ohio. This move was a defining moment, marking the transition of Mormonism from a small local group into a more organized, geographically expanding faith. Kirtland became a hive of activity. New converts arrived, church meetings were held, and Joseph continued to receive revelations that guided community-building efforts. Internal tensions. Despite the momentum, early cracks appeared within the nascent community. Some members questioned Joseph's leadership, particularly regarding revelations that governed personal property or communal living. A few men who had believed in the Book of Mormon struggled with Joseph's ongoing prophetic authority. Was this farm boy truly the mouthpiece of God, or had he just been used as an instrument for the Book of Mormon's translation? Sidney Rigdon, for instance, was a charismatic speaker with his own theological views. While he generally supported Joseph, he occasionally clashed with him over interpretations of doctrine and community organization. The friction highlighted the delicate balance Joseph faced. He needed to maintain unity among a diverse group of believers, each bringing their own backgrounds and biases. Emma's role and tribulations. Emma Smith played a vital but often understated role in these formative days. She compiled the first hymnal for the new church, selecting hymns that reflected the Restoration's theology. She also aided in Joseph's revelations, sometimes acting as scribe, and oversaw mundane but essential tasks like caring for new arrivals or ministering to the poor. She was known for her kindness and hospitality, though the challenges of constant relocation weighed heavily on her. Increasingly, Emma felt the burden of Joseph's calling. Local gossip about the Smiths never ceased. Poverty was a near-constant companion, and she had to endure her husband's frequent absences while he traveled or preached. Little did she know that an even more difficult test lay in the future: Joseph's introduction of plural marriage. For now, she supported him as best she could, believing in the divine purpose to which he testified. A growing movement. By late 1831, membership in the church had grown into the hundreds. The faithful gathered for meetings, built temporary meeting houses, and practiced a shared sense of community that would evolve into more formal organizational structures. Missionaries continued to spread the word, fueling both interest and controversy. Newspaper articles across the region mentioned Mormonites or Gold Bible Christians, painting them sometimes as fanatics, sometimes as earnest believers of a new sect. Simultaneously, Joseph Smith came to see himself not only as the translator of an ancient record, but as a prophet in the fullest biblical sense, receiving ongoing direction from God on temporal and spiritual matters. This expanding sense of mission set Joseph on a course that would define the rest of his life and shape the identity of those who followed him. Chapter 6. Kirtland, Expansion and Experimentation, 1831-1838. Establishing the Kirtland Church. When Joseph Smith and most of the New York members arrived in Kirtland, Ohio, they found Sidney Rigdon and other new converts waiting with anticipation. Kirtland became a center of intense religious activity. Converts gathered from nearby regions, drawn by the promise of ongoing revelation, spiritual gifts, and the idea that they were part of God's restored church. In these early Kirtland years, Joseph and other leaders attempted various forms of communal living, sometimes known as the law of consecration. Members donated property and resources to a shared storehouse under church-appointed agents. While the goal was to eliminate poverty and build unity, practical difficulties arose. Not all members wholeheartedly embraced the ideal of sharing all possessions. The program ultimately faced inconsistent participation and organizational challenges. Doctrinal developments. During Kirtland's rise, Joseph dictated many significant revelations that were compiled into what is now known as the Doctrine and Covenants. These revelations dealt with church governance, missionary work, spiritual gifts, and the nature of God. Some introduced novel concepts that set the church apart from mainstream Protestantism, such as the idea of a pre-mortal existence, the literal gathering of Israel in the last days, and the concept of modern prophets and apostles. At the same time, the Kirtland community became known for spiritual manifestations. There were accounts of visions, prophecy, speaking in tongues, and miraculous healings. Such events, while faith-affirming for some, alarmed others who felt the church was veering into fanaticism. Joseph tried to provide structure and caution, introducing guidelines to discern genuine spiritual gifts from deception. Founding of the Kirtland Temple. One of the hallmark projects of this era was the construction of the Kirtland Temple, the first temple built by Latter-day Saints. The revelation to build it was ambitious. The members, largely impoverished, were asked to sacrifice time, labor, and resources to erect a substantial stone structure. Work began in 1833 and continued for several years, with men quarrying rock by hand and women weaving and sewing to support workers. By 1836, the temple was completed enough for a dedication ceremony. The dedication service became famous for reports of heavenly manifestations. Many in attendance claimed to hear angels singing or see visions. Joseph later recounted that Jesus Christ and various biblical prophets appeared in the temple, bestowing priesthood keys crucial for the church's mission. These sacred experiences solidified the temple's status as a holy site and strengthened members' devotion. Financial speculations and the Kirtland Safety Society. With church growth came attempts at financial expansion. Joseph, Sidney Rigdon, and other leaders organized the Kirtland Safety Society, a kind of banking institution meant to provide credit and capital for church members. Unfortunately, it was launched amid national economic instability. The Panic of 1837 led to bank failures across the country. The Kirtland Safety Society was no exception. It soon collapsed, leaving many church members facing financial ruin. Blame fell upon Joseph and other church leaders for endorsing the venture. Apostasy, disaffection from the church, soared in Kirtland as some prominent members accused Joseph of mismanaging finances. Joseph argued that the bank's failure was partly due to external economic forces and unscrupulous external pressures. But the damage was done. Trust was shaken. Disappointed church members filed lawsuits. Internal dissent and external persecution intensified. Growing dissent. Some of Joseph's closest associates, including Oliver Cowdery and the Whitmer brothers, began to question his decisions. Tensions rose over issues of leadership authority, the practice of polygamy rumors, whispered but not yet publicly acknowledged, and disputes about finances. Although Oliver and the Whitmers had served as witnesses to the Book of Mormon, they found themselves at odds with Joseph's approach to new revelations and governance. The friction reached a breaking point. Several leaders broke with Joseph, charging him with authoritarianism and financial incompetence. Joseph, in turn, saw their dissent as rebellion against divine authority. Excommunications followed. This turmoil in Kirtland led Joseph to focus increasingly on Missouri, where a second gathering place, centered in Jackson County, had been designated as Zion. Missouri, land of promise and persecution. Parallel to developments in Kirtland, church members were gathering in Missouri, believing it to be the prophesied location of the New Jerusalem. Joseph visited Missouri multiple times, laying plans for a temple in Independence and directing settlers to build communal societies. However, conflicts with local Missourians, who viewed the newcomers' communal lifestyle, anti-slavery stance, and rapid growth with suspicion, erupted into violence. By 1833, mobs had driven many Latter-day Saints from Jackson County. They regrouped in nearby Clay County and then Caldwell County, continuing to face animosity. Joseph attempted to rally support in Kirtland to help his beleaguered followers in Missouri. In 1834, he organized Zion's Camp, a paramilitary expedition intended to assist and protect the persecuted saints in Missouri. The trek, beset by disease and contention, did not achieve its military objective, and participants returned to Ohio. Yet Zion's Camp also served as a crucible for leadership development, as many of its participants later became key church leaders. Departure from Kirtland. By 1837-1838, Joseph Smith faced mounting legal and financial troubles in Kirtland. Dissidents hounded him with lawsuits, and local hostility flared anew. Determined to preserve the church and his own safety, Joseph decided to leave Kirtland for Missouri, urging loyal followers to do likewise. The exodus from Kirtland marked the end of the church's first major period of settlement. The temple they had built, at great sacrifice, became a casualty of the schism. Eventually, it fell into the hands of dissenters and then other religious groups. Still, for the faithful who experienced the visions and dedicatory events there, the Kirtland Temple remained an emblem of sacred beginnings. Assessment of the Kirtland era. Historians view the Kirtland period as one of dramatic doctrinal formation and organizational growth. Joseph cemented his role as a prophet, establishing a pattern of continuous revelation that guided church affairs. Simultaneously, he courted controversy by engaging in financial speculation and defending his decisions with claims of divine sanction. Believers regard Kirtland as a time of revelatory outpouring, temple blessings, and foundational theology. Critics see it as a period when Joseph's ambitions and potential miscalculations led to broken fortunes and shattered relationships. Both perspectives acknowledge the pivotal nature of Kirtland. It was the crucible in which Mormonism took shape, forging a distinct identity poised to test its mettle on the harsh frontiers beyond. Chapter 7. Missouri Conflicts and the Path to Nauvoo, 1838-1839. Relocation to Far West. In early 1838, Joseph Smith arrived in Far West Missouri, where large numbers of Latter-day Saints had settled after being driven from Jackson County. Far West was located in Caldwell County, an area the Missouri legislature had ostensibly set aside for Mormon settlement. For a time, hopes ran high that this would be the church's new Zion, a place to unify and build anew without the problems that plagued Kirtland. Joseph quickly moved to reorganize the church leadership, excommunicating dissenters and rallying the faithful. A cornerstone temple site was dedicated in Far West, and the community began constructing homes, shops, and meeting places. However, tension with neighboring counties simmered. Long-standing prejudices against Mormons flared, fueled by economic competition, religious differences, and political partisanship. The 1838 Mormon War. By mid-1838, the distrust had escalated into open conflict. Skirmishes erupted between Mormon settlers and Missouri vigilantes. Rumors spread on both sides, sometimes exaggerating or fabricating threats. Mormons formed a militia, the Danites, supposedly to protect their community. Anti-Mormon militias responded in kind. Governor Lilburn Boggs, swayed by reports that Mormons were in rebellion, issued the now infamous extermination order on October 27, 1838, declaring that the Mormons must be exterminated or driven from the state. This license to persecute led to atrocities like the Horns Mill massacre on October 30th, where a mob attacked a small Mormon settlement, killing men and boys. Joseph's arrest and imprisonment. In late October 1838, Joseph Smith and other church leaders surrendered to Missouri militia in order to prevent further bloodshed. They were promised humane treatment but were instead subjected to mock trials and threats of execution. Joseph was accused of treason against the state. He spent the winter of 1838-1839 imprisoned in Liberty Jail, a cold and cramped cell that tested his resolve. During his confinement, Joseph penned several letters to the faithful, later compiled into scriptural texts by Latter-day Saints, Doctrine and Covenants sections 121, 122, and 123. These writings provided solace and direction, emphasizing patience in tribulation, the eternal nature of suffering, and the eventual triumph of righteousness. For many church members, these letters became a testament to Joseph's prophetic resilience. Meanwhile, thousands of destitute church members, driven from their homes in the Missouri winter, fled eastward across the Mississippi River into Illinois. The city of Quincy offered charitable aid, while other towns welcomed refugees. The collective trauma of expulsion from Missouri forged a deep sense of unity among the saints and a distrust of outsiders. Release and exodus. By spring 1839, Joseph and his fellow prisoners were moved to another location for trial. In a dramatic turn of events, they managed to escape, likely facilitated by guards sympathetic to their plight or bribed to look the other way. Joseph reunited with the main body of saints now massed near Quincy, Illinois. The events in Missouri demonstrated the fragility of Mormon settlements. The extermination order remained on the books until 1976, a historical footnote that underscored official persecution. For Joseph, the entire episode was both humbling and galvanizing. His experience in Liberty Jail deepened his convictions, and the lessons learned would shape the next phase, the founding of a new city that he believed would rival the might of any American metropolis, Nauvoo. Chapter 8. Building a City of Refuge. Nauvoo, 1839-1842. Founding Nauvoo. In mid-1839, Joseph Smith and church leaders searched for a location where the saints could gather without fear of immediate persecution. They found a swampy tract of land on the Mississippi River in Illinois, near the small town of Commerce. Driven by desperation and faith, they purchased the land and began draining the swamps, laying out streets, and erecting homes. Joseph renamed the settlement Nauvoo, which he claimed was a Hebrew word meaning beautiful place. Nauvoo quickly grew as thousands of refugees from Missouri arrived, joined by new converts from the eastern United States and even Europe. Within a few years, it became one of the largest cities in Illinois, rivaling Chicago in size. A city charter, granted by the Illinois legislature, provided Nauvoo with liberal powers, including a militia called the Nauvoo Legion. Nauvoo's rapid expansion. Under Joseph's direction, the saints built impressive structures, homes, shops, schools, and eventually, the Nauvoo Temple. The city's economy boomed. Skilled tradespeople established businesses. Immigrants from England and other parts of Europe, converted by the church's growing missionary force, brought capital and labor. Joseph instituted new civic structures, including a municipal court system in which he often played a leading role. The sprawling city found common purpose in building the temple, a grand structure overlooking the Mississippi. Plans called for ornate architecture, baptismal fonts, and rooms for ordinances taught by Joseph as part of what he termed higher priesthood knowledge. The aim was to restore ancient rites lost to mainstream Christianity, tying believers closer to their ancestors through baptisms for the dead, another new practice introduced during this period. Evolving doctrines and leadership style. In Nauvoo, Joseph further elaborated on the concept of eternal progression, teaching that humans could become like God, an idea that drew scorn from traditional Christians who saw it as heretical. He also introduced the Relief Society for Women, with Emma Smith as president, to provide charitable service and spiritual fellowship. This organization granted a more formal role to women within the church, though ultimate authority remained vested in male priesthood leadership. Joseph's leadership style by now was a blend of prophet, civic leader, and military commander. He oversaw not only religious matters but also municipal ordinances, the operation of the Nauvoo Legion, and even the local economy to some extent. Critics inside and outside the church raised concerns that he was consolidating too much power. Supporters believed he was establishing a God-directed community akin to a theocratic democracy. International missionary work. Nauvoo served as a springboard for expansive missionary efforts. Apostles like Brigham Young, Heber C. Kimball, and others traveled to England, baptizing thousands. The British converts, mostly from industrial centers, found the promise of Zion appealing, and many emigrated to join the saints in Illinois. This influx of new believers provided labor and financial backing that fueled Nauvoo's meteoric rise. At the same time, Joseph dispatched missionaries to other regions, hoping to broaden the church's global reach. Plans were made to evangelize in Palestine and other historically significant locations. While these plans sometimes stalled due to lack of resources or political realities, they reveal Joseph's grand vision for a worldwide movement. Emma's growing concerns. Emma Smith, widely respected among the saints, found herself increasingly uneasy about rumors that Joseph had introduced plural marriage to a select inner circle of church leaders. She had heard whispers but lacked concrete proof. Emma's deep love for Joseph clashed with her moral opposition to polygamy. She privately confronted him, seeking reassurance. Joseph, for the most part, deflected, explaining that certain doctrines were not ready for public disclosure. Nevertheless, friction simmered beneath the surface. Emma's role as president of the Relief Society put her in close contact with women who might have been approached about plural marriage. Her distress would only deepen as the practice became more widespread. Political entanglements. By 1842, Joseph Smith's growing political influence was evident. He met with candidates vying for the U.S. presidency, seeking redress for the losses the Saints had suffered in Missouri. He also planned a run for the presidency himself, seeing it as a means to secure legal protections for his people. This political activism, however, alarmed Illinois residents outside Nauvoo, who saw in Joseph's wide-reaching influence a potential threat to local and state autonomy. Adding to the controversy, Missourians continued to pursue legal charges against Joseph. They demanded his extradition, alleging he had orchestrated the violence in Missouri. Joseph used Nauvoo's municipal court system to prevent extradition, arguing that any trial in Missouri would be a sham. This constant legal battle kept tensions high, and Joseph under near-constant threat of arrest. The City of Saints. For many church members, Nauvoo truly was a city of hope, a chance to rebuild lives shattered in Missouri. They found brotherhood, purpose, and a sense of collective destiny. They believed Joseph was establishing a latter-day Zion that would flourish, a beacon on the banks of the Mississippi. Despite the rumors, lawsuits, and mounting opposition, life in Nauvoo included cultural events, dances, and general social vibrancy. Converts recalled it as a time of spiritual empowerment and community bonding. Yet the seeds of conflict were planted. Joseph's sweeping religious, civic, and military authority, combined with the introduction of secretive doctrines and the swirling suspicions of polygamy, would soon collide with the broader Illinois population, and even within Mormon ranks. The illusions of security that Nauvoo offered would, in time, prove tenuous. Chapter 9: Polygamy, Internal Strife, and Emma's Struggle. Origins of plural marriage. The exact timeline of Joseph Smith's introduction of polygamy remains a topic of historical debate. According to some accounts, Joseph received a revelation regarding plural marriage as early as the mid-1830s in Kirtland, though he did not publicly announce or widely practice it then. Others suggest the practice began in earnest only after the saints settled in Nauvoo. Whatever the case, by the early 1840s, Joseph had secretly taken additional wives. He introduced plural marriage to a select group of church leaders, who themselves took multiple wives, albeit discreetly. This secrecy was partly due to the potential legal ramifications and the strong cultural taboos against polygamy in mainstream American society. Emma's opposition. Emma Smith's anguish over plural marriage was profound. Raised in a monogamous Christian tradition, she saw polygamy as both morally wrong and socially destabilizing. She argued with Joseph, appealed to her own understanding of scriptures condemning adultery, and even threatened to leave him. For a time, Joseph convinced her of the revelation's divine source, or persuaded her to accept certain plural wives under specific conditions, only for tensions to flare again later. In the summer of 1843, Joseph dictated a revelation, now found in LDS Doctrine and Covenants section 132, that outlined the divine sanction of plural marriage and promised exaltation to those who followed it. The same text sternly warned Emma to abide and cleave, or face God's displeasure. Emma's internal struggle deepened. She sometimes tried to comply, only to be overwhelmed by jealousy and moral revulsion. The emotional toll on their marriage was severe, dissenters and the rise of opposition. Joseph's private practice of polygamy became an open secret among insiders. Several close associates, including William Law, a counselor in the First Presidency, became disenchanted upon learning of it. Law and others felt Joseph had betrayed the principles of virtue they believed the Church upheld. They saw polygamy as a direct contradiction to earlier teachings about the sanctity of marriage. This dissent took on public form when William Law, Robert Foster, and other disgruntled members established a newspaper called the Nauvoo Expositor. Its first and only issue exposed the practice of plural marriage and accused Joseph of mixing ecclesiastical and political power for personal gain. The paper demanded reform within the church and called for an end to polygamy. Destruction of the Nauvoo Expositor. On June 10, 1844, the Nauvoo City Council, led by Joseph Smith, who was mayor, declared the Nauvoo Expositor a public nuisance. Acting on this decision, the council ordered the city marshal to destroy the press and its printed materials. This act of suppressing the press alarmed neighboring communities and inflamed anti-Mormon sentiment. Critics labeled it a blatant violation of constitutional rights. Although Joseph believed he was protecting the city from what he viewed as slanderous and incendiary material, the destruction of the Expositor would become the catalyst for his final confrontation with Illinois authorities. Arrest warrants were soon issued against Joseph and other Nauvoo council members. Emma's final days with Joseph. The rift between Joseph and Emma never fully healed over polygamy. Yet in the days leading up to his arrest, they reportedly reconciled to some degree. She remained in Nauvoo with their children, standing by Joseph in his final crisis. As the storm of legal and public outcry gathered, neither realized that the end of Joseph's life was only days away. Polygamy would remain a controversial issue for decades, influencing Emma's relationship with the church after Joseph's death and shaping the trajectory of Mormonism's public image. Chapter 10. The Politics of Prophethood, 1842-1844. Joseph's presidential ambitions. In late 1843, feeling that the federal government had failed to protect the saints in Missouri and that Illinois governance was unreliable, Joseph Smith announced his candidacy for President of the United States. Though few believed he could win, the campaign aimed to spread the church's grievances and proposals for national reform. Joseph dispatched missionaries as campaign agents, distributing pamphlets detailing his platform. His platform included ideas like the abolition of slavery through compensated emancipation, the reduction of congressional power, and the expansion of civil liberties. To both his supporters and detractors, this move symbolized Joseph's extraordinary confidence, or hubris. Critics outside the church saw it as further proof that he aspired to a kind of theocratic dominance. Supporters argued he was merely seeking a peaceful redress for his people's suffering. mounting tensions with non-Mormons. As Nauvoo's population and economic influence grew, resentment from nearby towns intensified. Merchants feared economic competition, politicians worried about the bloc voting tendencies of the Mormon population. Rival militias viewed the Nauvoo Legion with suspicion. Rumors circulated about secret theocratic aims and polygamous harems. Local law enforcement officials chafed at the Nauvoo Municipal Court's tendency to protect Joseph Smith from arrest warrants. Tensions reached a fever pitch by mid-1844. The destruction of the Nauvoo expositor brought matters to a head. Illinois Governor Thomas Ford, seeking to maintain public order, demanded that Joseph and the Nauvoo City Council members stand trial in Carthage, the county seat. Decision to go to Carthage. Joseph, initially reluctant to surrender, considered fleeing west, but friends and peers, including Emma, urged him to trust Governor Ford's assurances of safe conduct. The possibility of a violent confrontation loomed if Joseph remained in Nauvoo. Believing that a peaceful resolution might still be possible, Joseph and his brother Hiram, along with other accused council members, traveled to Carthage under armed escort. Upon arrival, Joseph and Hiram were charged with riot for destroying the press. These charges were later upgraded to treason, preventing them from posting bail. They were confined to Carthage jail, a 2-story stone building under the guard of the local militia, prelude to martyrdom. While in Carthage jail, Joseph penned letters to Emma, offering reassurances. He also wrote to the saints in Nauvoo, urging them to maintain peace and rely on legal methods to resolve disputes. The mood was tense. Rumors circulated that vigilantes were planning to storm the jail. Governor Ford departed for Nauvoo, leaving the Carthage Greys, a local militia hostile to Joseph, in charge of protecting the prisoners. In the afternoon of June 27, 1844, a mob, faces often disguised with black paint, attacked the jail. Shots rang out. Hiram was killed almost immediately. Joseph, attempting to defend himself with a small pistol smuggled in earlier, fired a few shots but was overwhelmed. He was shot multiple times and fell from a 2nd-story window crying, "Oh Lord, my God!" Accounts vary, but the essential fact is that Joseph Smith and his brother Hiram were killed in the assault. Chapter 11. Arrest, Martyrdom, and Aftermath, June 1844. The Killing. The violent end of Joseph Smith's life shocked his followers. News of the murder rapidly spread across Illinois and beyond. Many saints feared an onslaught of further violence and braced for militia attacks on Nauvoo. As it turned out, widespread assault did not occur immediately, but the vacuum of leadership threatened to split the movement. Joseph's body was retrieved and taken back to Nauvoo, where grief-stricken saints gathered to mourn. Hiram's death also left a gap in leadership, as he had been next in line after Joseph. The twin deaths decapitated the church's hierarchy at the highest level, a crisis of succession. In the immediate wake of Joseph Smith's killing, chaos ensued about who would lead. Sidney Rigdon, the last surviving member of the First Presidency, returned to Nauvoo and claimed he should be the church's guardian. However, the quorum of the 12 apostles, most notably Brigham Young, asserted that Joseph had conferred priesthood keys upon them before his death. A dramatic meeting in August 1844 allegedly saw Brigham Young speak with a voice and appearance reminiscent of Joseph, convincing many that leadership should rest with the 12. Emma Smith's position in this crisis was complicated. She supported her son's claim to leadership, young Joseph Smith III, but he was still a child. She distrusted Brigham Young partly due to polygamy and financial disputes. The majority followed the 12, leading to a lasting schism wherein Emma and others eventually formed the reorganized Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, RLDS, now Community of Christ. Impact on the church and polygamy. With Joseph dead, Brigham Young eventually openly acknowledged plural marriage, which Joseph had introduced in secret. Polygamy became a defining and controversial feature of the Latter-day Saint movement. Tensions with non-Mormon neighbors escalated, leading to increasing hostility toward the saints in Nauvoo. By 1846, the exodus west began, culminating in the saints' settlement in what is now Utah under Brigham Young's leadership. Emma chose not to follow Brigham Young west, remaining in Nauvoo. She later remarried and guarded the memory of her husband, while maintaining disagreement with the polygamous branch of the church. Joseph Smith III eventually became the leader of the RLDS Church, offering a different interpretation of his father's legacy, one that downplayed or denied polygamy as a legitimate doctrine, secular and religious legacy. Joseph Smith's violent death resonated beyond his immediate community. Newspapers around the country reported on the American prophet, who claimed divine visions and met a tragic end. Critics saw his murder as the culmination of his megalomania and disregard for the law. Supporters memorialized him as a martyr who sealed his testimony with his blood. Over time, Joseph Smith's story has become entwined with broader American narratives of religious innovation, frontier violence, and constitutional questions about freedom of religious practice. The movement he founded continues to grow internationally, with millions of members in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and smaller factions like the Community of Christ, each claiming aspects of his theology and heritage. Conclusion and reflections. Joseph Smith emerged from humble beginnings in a turbulent era of religious revival and frontier expansion. From treasure-digging teen to prophet of a new religious movement, he inhabited multiple worlds, spiritual and practical, visionary and administrative. His life's arc crossed paths with dedicated followers who saw him as a modern Moses and with fierce antagonists who branded him a fraud. His claims of angelic visitations, revealed scripture, and restored priesthood authority set him on a collision course with America's Protestant mainstream. The controversies he courted, polygamy, the destruction of the Nauvoo expositor, his foray into politics, solidified an image of a complex charismatic leader who inspired unwavering loyalty in some and unrelenting suspicion in others. Emma Smith's perspective, central yet often overshadowed, reminds us of the human dimensions of the story. She grappled with the ethics of polygamy, the constant uprooting of her family, and the personal cost of following a prophet husband who demanded as much of her faith as he did of his followers. Her ambivalence and later opposition to polygamy reflect the very real tensions that Joseph's revelations introduced into the lives of the saints. Following Joseph's death, the church he founded splintered, only to regroup and persist, migrating west under Brigham Young and establishing a new center in the Rocky Mountains. In the decades and centuries since, the Latter-day Saint movement has undergone further changes, abandoning polygamy, re-evaluating certain teachings, and integrating more fully into the broader religious tapestry of modern America. Meanwhile, the figure of Joseph Smith remains pivotal, hailed by adherents as a prophet of God and questioned by critics who see in him the hallmarks of a visionary man in a visionary age. In the end, Joseph Smith's story is one of ambition, faith, conflict, and a search for divine truth, set against a young republic's backdrop of possibility and peril. Whether viewed as a true prophet, a creative religious innovator, or a controversial figure shaped by his time, Joseph Smith undeniably left a profound impact on American religious history. His legacy lives in the millions who read the Book of Mormon, gather in LDS chapels, and trace their spiritual ancestry to the frontier boy who ventured into a grove of trees, claiming to meet God himself. Note on sources and accuracy. This narrative draws from multiple historical accounts, including Joseph Smith's own writings, contemporary letters, official church publications, such as the Doctrine and Covenants, and critical works that challenge aspects of Joseph Smith's claims. Given the contested nature of his life, some details remain debated among historians. While this text attempts to maintain factual accuracy, readers are encouraged to consult primary documents and scholarly biographies, such as Richard L. Bushman's Joseph Smith, Roughstone Rolling, or Fawn M. Brody's No Man Knows My History, to form their own conclusions.